Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our Week 6 NFL preview, going through DFS and props for Sunday's action. Gonna break down the GPP top stacks and, of course, a few props over there for Underdog and Prize Picks. You might want to keep an eye on there for Sunday's action. So last week we had those Burrow and Stafford stacks bring us to the top of some of the GPPs, and while I didn't take down a contest, we had a few close calls, that's for sure. So pretty solid from the DFS side last week. And then over for props, we ended up sweeping Prize Picks and Underdog. So 6-0 on the prop side, had two stacks that nearly came through. Let's go ahead and run it back with our analysis for week 6. So here in this video, going to bring you those top stacks for this week of action, and of course a few props over there on Underdog and Prize Picks. So looking forward to it, a ton to go through here in a short amount of time. Let's go ahead and start it off with a look at our top stacks of the week. Stacking this week is going to be a little bit more difficult than weeks 1 through 5, as there aren't really any obvious spots to attack. We don't have that Chargers-Dolphins game. We don't have that Chiefs-Minnesota game that probably should have been even better last week. None of those, 55, 60 point totals, right? And a week like this, any sort of chalk out there to me is egregious, right? When you have all the games there in that like mid 40s range in terms of your game total, I know there's a few larger spreads that you could attack. None of those are worth being 10 to 15% chalk. So here for these stacks, what we're going to focus on are some cheaper, lower owned options that you can get to that are not only going to help you save salary, spend up for an elite tier running back or wide receiver, maybe even two in a lineup, but also give you some of the ownership leverage too, which is an added bonus when we don't have those obvious spots to get to. But on a week like this, at least in my opinion, my strategy, my process is the optimal way to go about those kind of slates. So we'll start off with Geno Smith, the Seahawks going against the Cincinnati Bengals. Two offenses that are competent, that like to throw the ball quite a bit, and that have been in a few shootouts over the past year or so where you've seen 55, 60 plus points scored. So we've seen a precedent for both of these teams going out there and smashing. So whether you want to stack the Seahawks side like we'll talk about here, or potentially even going with the Bengals, I think both have at least a little bit of upside out there for the large field contest. So if you're going to stack the Seahawks, the main reason I like them this week is that they're very predictable, right? If you're going to go through the air, if you're really going to lean into Geno Smith throwing 2-3 touchdowns, Metcalf, Lockett, and near locks. You've got Njigba that you can mix in there, Walker, Fant, Parkinson. There is tertiary options, but really it's those main two players, right? It's Lockett, it's Metcalf that you want to be looking at. And because Metcalf is seemingly a lot healthier here for week 6, it might be a little bit of a coming out party for him. So all are extremely affordable. If we take a look at their price tags, ownership, all that fun stuff, DK Metcalf at $6,800 is more than doable. Also not egregiously chalky. If we go down and find Tyler Lockett, you'll see that he's just $5,700. Also reasonable price tag right there, and a little bit more chalky at 9.9%, but still not 15-20% owned like you see from a few other players in this range. So the team in general is relatively low owned, right? You have spots where you can get leverage to the field, and in terms of buybacks, you've got a lot of options to choose from too, right? You've got Jamar Chase, right? An elite tier option you can use as a buyback. You've got Joe Mixon, who I think is going to get a ton of touches, whether the Bengals are playing from ahead or behind. You could even go for a cheaper option like Smith Jr. at tight end, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins if he plays, right, is somebody that you could throw into the mix. It's real easy to find a buyback, right, if you're attacking a Geno Smith stack, and I think it's pretty straightforward to stack the team, right? You either play both Metcalf and Lockett, you either play one of the two with a tertiary option, and that's really about it there for the Seahawks side. So what I think is going to be a low-owned stack that you can get to and also save a little bit of salary. Our second stack is going to be a Brock Purdy stack, and one that I don't think you have to buy back. So you can see over here for Geno Smith and the last stack that we talk about, I'm going to recommend to buy back pretty much every single time. But down here with Brock Purdy against the Browns, I'm not as sold on that, right? The Browns are dealing with PJ Walker playing quarterback, not projecting for very many points out there. And though the total in this game isn't otherworldly, you have a huge spread favoring the 49ers. And what a lot of people are going to do here is attack CMC, right? Assume that he's going to get a lot more touches because of a positive game script, which is entirely possible, but a lot of times teams get to that positive game script, right? They grow that lead by throwing the football, right? A lot of times we assume it's the running backs that are making them, get out to these 14, 21 point leads. A lot of times it's just them leaning into their identity, which surprisingly, at least surprisingly to me, maybe not to everyone out there, right? Brock Purdy's thrown the ball a ton this year, right? 30, 40 plus times a game, and has been very efficient in all of those attempts as well. So I have him projected for 18 points in terms of points per dollar, is one of the better quarterbacks on the slate. And much like what we have with the Seahawks, a lot of premier options to use as pairings, right? You've got Ayuk, Samuel, who are, elite tier wide receivers on a slate like this that aren't priced up on that elite tier. You have George Kittle off a 3 touchdown week. You have CMC, who you could use out of the backfield as a pairing, all that are elite tier options that you're getting at lower ownership than you'd expect. So first off, only 1.6% for Brock Purdy. That has to go up by the end of the week, right? People are going to see the low ownership on Purdy and some of these 49ers and probably adjust at some point, but CMC is chalky, right? Actually 9.1%. He's got some ownership at this point, but I don't know if I'd call him chalky. But guys like Ayuk, right? Let's go down here, find Ayuk and Samuel, 4.2%. 3.6% on a Debo, and both are extremely affordable right there towards the bottom of the 6K range. Kittle's a little bit more expensive, right? He's 5K, but still only 2.7% owned. So, all of these stacks you can use as value stacks, right? You're not taking a 7K quarterback with 2 7K wide receivers. No matter which stack you're taking out of these three, including Baker Mayfield, right? The Buccaneers that we'll talk about here in just a minute, you're going to have a ton of salary to spend, right? If you want to take CMC, right, as a part of your Purdy stack, then go for it, right? If you want to add a CMC as just a one-off, right, when you're going with the Geno Smith stack, you're going to be able to afford that, right? So it's just... You're buying not only, right, the correlation with all of these teams, the potential shootout that we're hoping for in all three circumstances, but it's also what you're getting at the other spots in your lineup. The last stack we'll go through is going to be Baker Mayfield going against the Detroit Lions. The Lions are a team I love to target in large field GPPs, especially when it comes to their opposing teams, because they like to get into shootouts, right? They're a highly efficient offense. Now, the defense has stepped it up here in 2023, so they aren't nearly as much of a target as what we had last year, but Baker Mayfield on his own has also been a little bit impressive. So not only do we get the Detroit defense that I think can be a little bit vulnerable from time to time, but we also get Baker Mayfield, who I think is being a little bit disrespected. So the stacking options, kind of like the first two offenses, are relatively straightforward, right? Not a ton of people that you have to feed. You've got Mike Evans, the clear number one. You've got Godwin, more of the PPR monster. You've got Kadon, Rashad White out of the backfield that you can mix in. And that's about it, right? There's not 6-7 names like you have on the Chiefs, right? There's not 5-6 different options on the Vikings, right? When Justin Jefferson would be healthy, it's a lot more straightforward to stack them. And then of course on the Detroit side, you have a lot of mega chalk, right? David Montgomery, one of your highest owned running backs. You've got St. Brown, Reynolds, Raymond, Williams, Laporta, right? That are all going to garner quite a bit of ownership this week. And rather than stacking the chalkier side, right, especially Montgomery, right? He's going to be really popular this weekend. I think a way to get to that team, right, get to that high total in offense that is going to be popular this week is potentially as a buyback to these stacks, right? Not a lot of people are going to have the stones to stack Baker Mayfield this week. So I like the price tag. I like the matchup. The buybacks, the stacking options, to me are relatively straightforward. And much like the other two stacks that we went through, you're going to save a ton of salary by getting here, right? I mean, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin are also relatively affordable. Now, a little bit more expensive for Evans, but you're also getting sub 10% ownership. Down here with Chris Godwin, even lower ownership. The points per dollar value is even higher than what you have with Evans. So they're maybe a little bit expensive at wide receiver, but throw in a Kadon, right? You take one of those two wide receivers, you take Cade on for a little bit of salary relief, and you're well on your way in terms of salary. So it's easy to stack. It's very straightforward to find some of the pairings, which is just a few reasons you might want to keep an eye on these three players. And now for the prop side of things, and two rushing attempt props that I think you might want to keep an eye on, especially considering they fit some mainstream scripts out there in terms of your spreads. So first off, we got the Jerome Ford under on rushing attempts. He's at 11 on Prize Picks, juiced minus 150 over over on DraftKings Sportsbook. And in a matchup against the #1 rushing defense in the NFL, he's probably going to face some tough sledding. And on top of just the matchup issues, he has the game script issues going on with PJ Walker playing quarterback. They're not implied to score very many points, be very efficient on offense to begin with. So whether you want to fade his rushing attempts, his rushing yards prop, almost everything is juiced under for Jerome Ford at this point. A few other things to consider. The time of possession, right, is going to be low. But on top of that, you've got Kareem Hunt starting to vulture touches. He was signed a few weeks ago. He's getting more and more acclimated to the offense, conditioning getting more up to point. And whenever he takes over, instead of a Jerome Ford, he's going to see an even larger downtick in production. So you've got the matchup issues. You've got Kareem Hunt coming in, stealing a lot of touches and snaps from a Jerome Ford, which is why I love the under at that spot. And the sports books do too, right, with all that juice at -150. Lastly, we've got the Raheem Mostert over. So, maybe under, a little over action here as well. And the Dolphins are huge favorites, right? So rather than being huge underdogs, they're going to be in that positive game script. And you're also dealing with a player going out of the fold instead of a player coming in, right? You have Kareem Hunt coming in for the Browns, and then David Achane going out for the Dolphins. So in terms of snap share, in terms of usage, both of those should go up for Raheem Mostert. On top of that, they're going to control the ball more. They should run more offensive plays as huge favorites out there. And if they get a touchdown, maybe 2-3 touchdown lead, it's going to be a lot of Mostert out there in the second half. So 14.5 rushes is also juiced about -150 towards the over, which brings a ton of value over there on the prop side. So those are two props that I like. Of course, guys, for all the different exposure I'm getting to, make sure to check out my Patreon page. A link is down below. That's where I post all the different prop exposure I'm getting to. But at this point, the only prop that's available on Prize Picks is, I believe, the Mostert over. They do have Jerome Ford up, but he's at 11 rushes. So probably not the same kind of value that we could take over here on Underdog, which is why I chose to focus on that side. But of course, if we end up getting value that opens up, right, as I'm sure we will, right, over the next day or so, there'll be a lot of those posts over there on Patreon for Prize Picks and for Underdog. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for the Week 6 preview. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead, smash that like button for me. And for access to all of the projections that you see in my videos, of course, all the different prop exposure that I'm getting to, make sure to check out the Patreon page. The link is down below, supports the channel a ton, and gives you quick access to all my projections in research sheets to go out there and make your life simpler and also more profitable over there for the DFS side. Appreciate the support here, guys. Best of luck out there with those lineups and those prop slips, and may you go out there and take home a few GBPs.